Hi again then guys, and welcome to another specific look at a certain car from the latest batch of vehicles added, of course, to Forza 7, and this one is going to pique the interest of a lot of people. A lot of people love this car, even more people love the brand, and that is of course the McLaren 720s. Now, I'm going to go straight off the bat with the negatives, because a lot of people are not going to like or even agree with a lot of the things that I have to say in this video, because to clarify straight off the bat, I don't dislike this car. I don't hate it. I don't think it's a bad car. So, kind of disarming, I know, but why do I say that I'm starting with the negatives then? Well, because I have the same problem with this car that I do with literally every McLaren of the modern generation beyond the F1 and the P1. And that is, get ready to hate me, it's boring. I find all McLarens apart from the P1 and the F1 to be utterly generic, soulless supercars. They're kind of like Nissan GTRs and Audi R8, but less interesting and more monotonous. They all look so similar to each other, and I'm just going to use this video to just go full bore into the hate on this so that people can rant at me down below, dislike the video, whatever you want to do, because I'm not going to sugarcoat it. The 720s is such a boring approach to a supercar. It has expected numbers, generic appearances, or a generic appearance, and the performance is good, but is it really? Yeah, it's fast, but a great supercar isn't just fast. It's about way more than that. It's about the full immersive experience. Now, to put my own thoughts even more succinctly about this car, I would consider this to be, in effect, McLaren's version of what Pagani did with the Huayra. Now, I don't dislike the Huayra, but to highlight the point, Pagani's bread and butter was the Zonda. They learned everything they know from that car, and then they refined that, arguably, into the Huayra. They made some changes, they carried some things over, the spirit of Pagani, if you will, was transferred into the new car, but crucially, and this is where I believe McLaren fails, the Huayra feels different. It feels justified in existing. It's a significantly different car than the Zonda is in all of its forms, despite being so similar in certain ways. The McLaren 720s does not feel like that. It does feel like their version of a Huayra, that swoopier bodywork, over 700 horsepower, that longer, more exclusive, more artistic shape, compared to McLaren's bread and butter, which is of course the MP4 lineup, which was first the 12C, then evolved into the 650S, 675, then they downgraded them to the 570, the 540, to people who wanted something more like a modern Lotus Esprit, if you will. Then of course you have stuff like the P1 and the F1, which are outstandingly good supercars, because they actually feel like McLaren was inspired. The F1 of course started it all, and they can never live up to that again. Even if they make a new one which is technically better, it still won't be, because of when the McLaren F1 achieved it. Not just what it achieved, but it did it before everyone else. It was decades ahead of its time, and that's what made it so good. The P1 does a great job of bringing that kind of approach into a modern age, but far more digital, whereas the F1 was a much more analog supercar in comparison, and all the better for it. But that's the problem with the 720s as far as I'm concerned. The specs are good, but are they really? The Ferrari 812 Superfast has far more power than this thing. The Noble, for instance, the M600, is lighter. So there are various other cars which already do, sometimes earlier. The Noble, of course, is a far older vehicle than this one is. Multiple years ago it did similar kinds of numbers, and yet it doesn't feel new enough. It doesn't feel inspired. It feels like just another McLaren. And to me, it feels like McLaren is doing what Ferrari does with their toys. They put a Ferrari badge on anything that they think will sell. And that just feels to me like what McLaren's doing. And I know that a lot of people are going to hate that viewpoint. And I understand that you hate it. I would feel that way if somebody said that about, for instance, Maserati. Has Maserati sold out and tried to make better selling cars by having SUVs and sedans? Yeah, sure they have. But I still like them. So I completely get if somebody hates me for having this opinion. That's just the way it is for me. Now, as I said, I don't mindlessly hate them. I actually have reasons why I don't. I just don't like the fact that they all feel the same. And it's not just in Forza, in Gran Turismo as well, McLarens feel so similar to each other, they just have slightly different amounts of power and slightly different weights. The essential shape doesn't change that much, the lights, the grills, the intakes, they all just feel like riffing on the same thing. And to me, I find that utterly boring, especially when the car to begin with didn't interest me that much, the MP4. Now, for those who do want to try this car, who are McLaren fans, let's switch up the review and put my more objective head on rather than my subjective one, because everything that I've just said is pure personal opinion. Now though, let's do what I usually do in a review and talk about what can appeal to everyone. Okay, let's discuss that. First of all, the price. You don't have to buy it. It's part of a car pack, so it's free. That's pretty good. But even if you did have to, $430,000 is very good, especially when you take into account that's exactly the same, somewhat ironically, as the Porsche Pink Pig 917 that we looked at yesterday. Kind of strange that they're the same price, but there you go. 710 horsepower. That's certainly not bad. Not bad at all. More than enough to make it a great supercar in terms of straight line performance, and so is 567 pound-feet of torque. It's a turbo-aspirated engine, and I will say that one of the best things about this car is the weight. It weighs 1,338 kilos, which is very good. That's a good 200 or 300 kilos lighter than its modern, for instance, Lambo or Ferrari counterparts. Then again, that is a very British approach. British exotics, be it Lotus, McLaren, whatever, they are typically lighter. That's one of the British defining things about our sports cars and supercars. They do tend to be lighter than the opposition. And consequently, and this is a really good way to consider how good the car can be, because the weight is so reasonable and so low, you could say, combined with a good amount of power, the horsepower per tonne is very healthy. In fact, it can rival a Veyron. 531 is not bad at all. Plus the category, stock at least, without homologation parts fitted by the game, is R-Class 816 PI. So you've got plenty of room to move, even with homologated parts. And as far as driving the car itself, how does it feel? Well, it certainly doesn't feel bad. It suffers from a little bit of understeer. Drifting it is fairly easy, although I will caution you that coming out of corners, the car has a very nasty habit of trying to correct its own front end, and that can actually lead to flipping out the other way if you're not careful, over-correcting it in effect. And of course, the crucial straight-line performance that you would want from any true supercar is more than ample. That's kind of the problem that I have with this car though. Overall, there are plenty of good things that I can say about it, just like I do with any other McLaren review apart from the P1 and the F1. The problem is, the things that I have to say about the car are very technical. All of the good points that I just mentioned are just numbers. None of them were to do with how the car actually feels, or how it sounds, or how it looks. Because, to me, that's where it ends. It's not that interesting to look at. It doesn't sound that great, especially not in comparison to the other supercars out there, and the performance feels, I've got to be honest here, you're not going to like to hear this word, but generic. It feels like a generic supercar. It feels like if you asked a kid to design a supercar, it's got everything that they would just write down. And I don't mean a kid saying like 2,000 or 3,000 horsepower or anything like that. I mean, if you asked a child who knew enough about cars to design one, to draw a supercar, they would draw a shape that looks something like this. They'd probably give it 700 horsepower, and it would probably have the kind of look and sound that this one does. So to me, it's just a little bit too expected. And in the supercar world, the best way to be forgotten is to be expected. I do not think that the 720S is going to be a collector's item. I don't think that any of the MP4s are going to be. I think that the F1 and the P1 will be. Why? Because they are inspired supercar choices. And to me, that's the biggest problem that I have with this car. I don't hate it, I don't like it, because I believe that McLaren could and should have done better. But maybe that's just me. Overall then, that's it for this pick. Of course, it'll probably be a controversial one because a lot of people love McLaren. But of course, if you want to check out my other reviews, if you don't hate me too much, then you can click through at the end and see those. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.